So wait, Dr. Betty, let's dive right in if it's cool. Um, you have one of the most incredible stories like ever. Um,
Thank you.
thank you for being here. And so you're a veteran, so thank you so much for your services. Like, tell me, what was that decision like? I'm always curious, like, what was that decision to go the military route? And then how long were you there for? Like, tell me everything about just entering the military world. I'm just so blown away by that world to begin with. So, like, what was that decision like prior to going?
Well, I'm excited that you're even asking the questions because oftentimes women tend to not even being get asked what was their choice or what was their decision, what journey were they walking whenever they actually did go into the military. So thank you. So my journey was actually kind of an easy one. I grew up in a very small town in Pennsylvania. The town had one high school, so that lets you know that we were very intermingled. And so, even being a little girl of color, I knew that there were certain things that I had to do that my mother, who was an Army veteran, would not accept anything less. And so, I was always raised that my dad was Air Force, my mom was Army. They met in Landstuhl, Germany whenever women could not get married or have children in the military. So my mom got out after 4 years, they married. And so I'm the younger of the two girls that were a product of that. So my mom, from the time I was born, I had structure. She guided me along the way as to what I needed to know, what I needed to do. And if I didn't know the questions to ask, she would kind of get my mind going. So from the very early stages of elementary school, she was asking me, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? Well, what kind of job would you like to do? But I was constantly seeing her being a federal government worker and so proud of her, watching how she was called upon in the community to do shorthand. Now, Ron, do you know what shorthand is?
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you like the typing, like in that like stenographers. There's that.
Right, but there's
Yeah.
actually a version that you don't use technology. It's where the individual does a shorthand drawing of words and then puts it all together. So my mom was a master of doing shorthand. And so she was always the expert in those kind of things, along with being the town gospel piano player. And so my sister and I were always singing with her in a musical group. And so all those things were that structure that I needed. So when I turned 17, I knew that I better have an answer the next time my mom said, what am I going to do when I turn 18, when I graduate? And I knew that I could get into a college, but I didn't want to be burdened down with debt and scholarship and have to be competitive. I knew that I could get a job. I mean, I did very well at Kentucky Fried Chicken until I gave the breast to a customer who wanted a thigh. And then, that didn't last long.
No, oh no, you can't make that mistake at KFC. Uh-uh.
That's right. And so I always remembered my mom talking about the military. And in my mind, everything was the Army. I just thought that if I joined the military, I'm joining the Army. So that was going to be my response. I'm going to join the Army. So I went down to the recruiting station, and before I knew it, the Marine Corps recruiter was right out front. And I ended up in the beautiful place of Paris.
Wow. And so you had
Wait, you
spoken.
let that go too fast. Not Paris, France. It was Paris Island, South Carolina.
Oh no, but I was gonna ask about that because I was gonna say like this is the lead-in, because that does not sound like a fancy place at all. Like I assumed it was gonna say, but furthermore though, not only is it not fancy, you're talking about the Marines, right? So I work with a lot of women that are in predominantly male-dominated industries, like finance, all that. You're talking about the Marines.
That's
Like, how many women were recruited to the Marines in your kind of what is it like the year or like it? in your recruitment? How many people?
So let me put it into perspective for you. This was 1978. You probably weren't even born in 1978.
2 years away. 2 years away.
There, there you go. So 1978 had a large afro, had wedge type shoes, had never run more than a mile, and never really did that in a I did it more as a sport in recess and, trying to run from my mom maybe. But, never did anything like that. Just thought because at the time in 1978, the female Marines were known as women Marines. And right. And it's so from World War I and then World War II up, we were known as women Marines. So we had makeup classes, we had uniform classes. We did nothing that required hard physical fitness. At the time that I went in, we had a blue sateen type of physical fitness uniform. There were no trousers, no slacks that we could wear, and it was during this 1978 to about 1985 when all that changed, that we were issued camouflage utilities, we were issued boots, we were given a rifle and told how to shoot. And shortly, a few years later, they took the woman away and we were Marines. So all that was, I got to be on the front line, so to speak, of that change for women Marines being women Marines. And that's why in my latest book, I actually said personal reflections from a woman Marine, knowing that today they are Marines and there's not that distinction like back in yesteryear.
That's amazing that they were so quick to separate, right? Like I've heard the horrible stories of World War II where there was two different like men marine, like two different like white marine, black marine, right? Like or marine of color even, right?
Yeah.
So in 78 they're still doing that with women. It's still okay to do that with women in 78.
It was still right. Gender, we were
Right.
separated.
Right. Wow.
Luckily, because of the Montford Point Marines of World War II, we weren't separated ethnicity,
Right.
but we were just separated gender. And even to today, and I can say, well, it's not really today, as of March of this year in 2022, enlisted females were trained separately and only at Paris Island, South Carolina, but luckily they are piloting. They're now at San Diego as well as Paris Island, South Carolina. So look at all the decades that it took for that service specifically to kind of say there is one way to train a Marine, and it's good if you're a male and it's good if you're a female.
And what does that teach you? What does that teach you as a 18, 19-year-old woman of color who's just trying to like serve her country? Like what is that what was your takeaway? Like how did you embody that when you're going through it?
Well, the takeaway, I don't know how they're embodying it now, but as someone who wasn't afforded that opportunity, I really loved the female tribe. I loved being trained by female drill instructors, being around my sister Marines, and having that connection before graduating and being pushed out into Marine Corps installation, having to do a job right beside a male. And also remember back in 1978, we couldn't do all the jobs that are open now. We were more clerical, administrative, logistics, food service. And then we slowly got into like motor transportation. We got into military police, and then we're able now to be an infantry, and all the job titles, or almost all the job titles, are open to females. I mean, so it wasn't something where overnight it happened. And so I was afforded the ability to still be administrative and to be paid just the same as that male Marine.
Oh, very good. Okay. And what job did you have in the
So I
clerical.
was a admin person. I was a 0151, which I don't think they even have that military occupational specialty now. And then I graduated to an administrative chief. But during that time, my mom had always taught me to volunteer, always volunteer, you get some really good duties and good opportunities when you volunteer. So that worked for me when I volunteered for recruiting duty. So while I was on recruiting duty in Baltimore, Maryland, met some wonderful people, taught me some outstanding skills. If you can sell the Marine Corps, you can sell just about anything. And so I enjoyed my time being a recruiter. And it just opened up so many doors for me, even now as a civilian, still working on the forefront for veterans. And so, but that's what I was, administrative, admin chief, and then a canvassing recruiter.
And that's phenomenal. Like, it's still interesting to hear how young the program is to allow women to do everything in the Marines and in the military. You when you and I first spoke, you were telling me that it's like how many there's so many women in the military at large that are fighting, that are doing so much for the country, for the world, and they go oftentimes, most times, unnoticed. And I thought about, I was like, yeah, I never hear about the heroes from World War II, the female heroes. I never hear about the females in Vietnam. I never hear any of that stuff, right? Why is
Yeah.
that? Why are women like I hope I'm not getting you in trouble, but like why are women not brought to the forefront? Why are they not acknowledged, honestly?
I think it's like, think about when your first days of college. When you go into college, you just want to get A's, you want to do the best you can. If you're there on a sports scholarship, you want to do the best you can. And that's what all of us wanted to do. We didn't know that at the time when we went in for some women, there were never women who had ever done this before. There were women during the 1960s who never knew that there were no female admirals or generals that were in the leadership chain of their military. They didn't know that. So to dream the dream, you have to see the dream. And when you're in the midst of the dream, you just want to get out alive. And so, and so that's what many of us were doing. We're just trying to know what the rules are, go by the rules, and do the best job we can. So it's amazing when I think about women like my mom who enlisted and went over to Germany. There were also Army women who were known as the 688s, the 688s Postal Battalion. And they were a Black female battalion of postal workers who were actually given the opportunity to fix the mail. At that time, they were writing letters to G.I. Joe. And who's G.I. Joe? G.I. Joe wasn't everybody. And so they got it all sorted out. And now, they're legendary. But during the time, they just were given the job to fix the mail crisis in Europe, and they did it. It didn't matter to them that they were all women of color or that they were the first to be in a group identified that way, or that they were not only met the time frame, but they did it in less than the time that they were given. And then I think about the women that served in country Vietnam. Oftentimes we think about the nurses that served in the Navy, Coast Guard, and Air Force and Army. But there were also non nurses that served in part of the military services that were in country Vietnam. And their stories are never known. I mean, they know that they were there. They've written books about their time in Vietnam, but it's up to us as agents of the word, to make sure that we share their stories. One of the places, I don't know if you know about it, Ron, but it's the Women's Memorial, the Military Women's Memorial in Washington, D.C. And it's our only memorial that tells the stories of women of all military services, reserve and regard, or reserve and a regular. and tells about their journeys, who the first were in some of their jobs, and the different acolytes. Because if you ask the military those questions, oftentimes they say, well, we can tell you who the first aviator was, or a certain aircraft. But to talk about women in those roles, it's really the Military Women's Memorial who is capturing that information. And so I encourage your listeners to just check them out. It's www.womensmemorial.org, and just to read and hear some of those stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's crucial. I think it's so important because, yeah, when I think how, like when I think the memorial, I think like the Washington Memorial, like the Veteran Memorial where you see the big stones and everything. But it's like, yeah, I've never even heard of that. Like it's so unfortunate to me that this is so like not forgot, but like just kind of not addressed. But I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but it's so unfortunate. So like, how long were you in the military as a career?
I was in for 14 wonderful years. Now, if you talk about devil dog years or Marine Corps years, and that may make me even older, but it was 14 years active duty.
And then how did you transition out? Like that always fascinates me. Like how did like now you have like the GI Bill, you have all these opportunities. Like where did you pick?
Well, think about 1992. So 1992, when I got out, there was the Vietnam GI Bill, which I wasn't qualified for because I came in after the Vietnam era. And at my time, there was an educational benefit known as VEAP, the Veteran Educational Assistance Program. And you probably have never heard of it because it was the worst program. I think at the maximum, it was like $2,100 a class. I mean, you could really just use it for one class. And it was because of that and those that were transitioning during the downsizing during the Gulf War in the early 90s that VA and DOD looked at how the educational benefits needed to be more of a draw for young people to join the military. So now when you talk about the GI Bill is one that you can give to a spouse or give to a child. I mean, you can go to Harvard, you could go to a community college, you could be an apprentice. I mean, there's so many things you can do with the GI Bill now that you couldn't do back in 1992. So I thought I was marching on a combat readiness training. I was in a platoon, and it was September 1992. And why do I remember it so well? I remember it because during that time, they would give bonuses to certain military occupational specialties. And administrators, they never gave bonuses for it. And so I made this deal with God. I said, God, that will be my clear sign that it's time for me to get out. If there's ever a bonus that's assigned to administrators. So September 1992, when I was marching in the hills of Camp Pendleton, California, I heard the word through the platoon that they had finally offered monetary bonuses to downsize the military. If you were a staff NCO and you were an administrator, you could get either a lump sum or an annual bonus. And I took the money and ran. I ran quickly. I was actually discharged 1 October 1992. So it happened that fast.
And then what did you do? I'm on pins and needles. You're such a good storyteller. I'm like, oh, what happened next?
It happened that fast. So one of the things that we do, and I guess civilians do this too, when you're transitioning out, you have to turn in your keys and you have to do what's known as checkout. So I was checking out, and one place that I checked out in was the MWR, which was the Morale, Welfare, and I think Education, MWR, and Recreation, Morale, Welfare, and Recreation. And I had my little sheet there, and the lady was looking, and she said, "Oh, "Oh, you were in administration." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She goes, "We have a job here for a GS5. Would you be interested in that?" At that moment, I got the job. So literally, I transitioned one day in uniform to the next day a civilian uniform, and spent the first couple years as a civilian helping other Marines make that transition. And so we improved the, you may have heard of it. It's now called the Transition Assistance Program. And it's to try to give military members as much information as they transition out. But I like to say that you only know what you need to know when you need to know it. So we found early on that we gave them too much information, and then when they needed it, they couldn't find it. So what we did was made sure that when you needed education guidance, because you may not want to go to school right away, you knew how to get it and where to find it. If you needed a job right away and you were going to be in the Southern California area, we had employers come in and actually interview folks, and so that they had jobs just like me the next day whenever they were separated from the military. If it's housing that you need, whatever it is you need, it was right on time. And I'm happy to say that over the decades they've improved the transition assistance program so much that military members, even if they're not going to remain in one area where they leave their active service, there are links and resources in all the states and overseas to help military members who are retiring or separated, so they never feel like they're left alone and they know how to get the information they need.
That's incredible and so necessary because I used to teach I used to teach community college, I used to teach public speaking, and I had a lot of vets coming in and sharing their stories, but they would also share the stories of how quickly how quickly forgotten they were too by the system, right? There's like, okay, here's your money, go, you know? So it's like, and this was, over 10, 15 years ago, but like, it's so good to hear that that is being rectified.
Yes, it is. And, it's not only those benefits, but it's also ongoing health benefits, ongoing mental health, ongoing connections. And so they do make healthcare still available. I believe it's for 90 days after they transition. And then those that are actually being discharged due to a disability will have ongoing and a greater ability to have health care and services. So we've really tried to work VA, the military services together so that so that the service member becomes a veteran and it's very seamless.
That's incredible. That's really, and you're still in that, not in that role, but you're still in that industry now, right? You're in that
I'm
realm now.
somewhat in the industry. I still work for the Department of Veteran Affairs in an office known as the Veterans Experience Office. And, I'm honored to be there because I've had the experience of a decade working with the Center for Women Veterans, where we got to advocate just for what women veterans needed. And now we're looking at the full experience of veterans. And not only veterans, I mean, their veterans' families, their caregivers, and then survivors, because we have to understand that in some cases, when a veteran passes or a service member passes, there are their survivors that are also eligible for VA benefits.
That's incredible. That's, it's so funny. It's like, it's such an important part of our world, and I'm not exposed to this, so it's so crazy to hear all these things, but I mean, this is a machine that needs to be run and needs to be oiled and needs to be all the things. That's really great. So what have you? What's kind of like? I'm gonna ask you like a kind of an intense question. What's for you like? You're clearly so passionate. You're clearly still in it. Like, what still keeps you fighting for this cause?
What keeps me still fighting is when I think that the war has been won, and then I turn on the TV and see that we're back to square one. So that keeps me in the fight. After being with the Center for Women Veterans for so long, when we were there, fighting for women's rights, fighting, paying attention for military sexual trauma, being concerned with it. Military sexual trauma, it's not for females, it's also for males. And then looking at women of minorities, women on the reservation. I mean, so many things that we just don't talk about, and feeling like over a decade we're at a good place with that. And then here we are on the nightly news just as recently as last evening talking about what the military services are going to do regarding military sexual trauma. So you think that you've made some headway, and then you realize that the discussion still must be had because we really haven't gone as far as what we think.
Yeah, like LGBTQ as well, right? Like how does that fit in all this? I mean,
Absolutely, because when I served in the 1970s and 80s, I mean, it was don't ask. In fact, this was even before don't ask, don't tell. There were still what we call witch hunts, where people could turn you in if you looked gay, if you sounded gay, if you walked like you were gay, and you really had no recourse because you then had to try to prove that you weren't gay. And the military service went through lots of different ways, and then of course don't ask don't tell, where you could be but you just couldn't speak it. And then there was a time when it was open, and it has been open, but then you kind of go back in, and so it's very different for many people. I do know that the White House and Department of Defense is trying to look at many of those discharges where people were unfairly and falsely discharged because of their sexual identity or how they were accused of, so that that individual can be eligible for benefits and services. So it's taken a long time, but this is something that's been going on, from the beginning, even from World War II, regarding military members of color, how they would get what's known as blue discharges. And with that came no benefits or
oh my
services.
God, it's horrific. How it's horrific. Like it's not okay. This is like such a. I mean, I'm embarrassed to bring up this example, but I directed the first musical I directed was the musical Hair, where it's all about the Vietnam War, and and there's a line in there where the main character gets drafted, and one of his friends goes, it was a guy. He's like, "Well, just tell them that we're lovers." Right? They're trying to help him get out of going, and the character doesn't go that route. And I remember like hearing that, and that was the first time I was exposed to that as an option, right? What is the argument from like the crusty old white general? I can say it because I'm not in the military, right? Like the like, what is that guy's argument for not allowing gays to talk about gays, people like LGBTQ people? What was the argument originally for don't talk about it? Was it
It's a lo
safety?
It's a really long history, but you're right. It's security. It's security of the military, security of to get a security clearance, there were certain things that you had to abide by and you had to confirm. And to get one and to keep your security clearance, there were many things that you couldn't have done. You could not have and engage in or have any homosexual contact, just like you couldn't have had any bankruptcies, you couldn't have had anything with the possibility that you could be bribed or you could be pulled over to
Like
the dark
blackmails?
side by another country. Because remember, this was during the Cold War years, and so the thought was that money or bribes could turn you, and if you were a deviant in any way, what their definition was, that then you could be coerced and you would be a security. violation.
you know, I haven't worked in musical theater. Not to bring up stereotypes, but I mean, I've met some tough gay dudes that I would stand behind them. Like if I was in a dark alley, they're with me. I'm like, you guys got this, you know? Like, so it's just like it's so insulting to me that like there's this less than approach, right? So at any rate, man, oh man, you saw some stuff.
I have seen.
You have seen, and you're doing incredible work now. And so like again, like just thank you so much. Is there anything that you want to add that I've kind of just to like close it out like that I've missed? I mean, like God, like thank you so much for everything you do. But is there anything else that you want people to know about?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And I do want to do a plug, for leadership lessons, reflections from a woman Marine. And I also wanted to show you the cover specifically because that is the Women's Memorial that I'm standing in front of. And if you are ever in Washington, D.C., and you're on the metro or you go to Arlington National Cemetery, the Women's Memorial is right next to Arlington National Cemetery. It's an easy walk through, but you'll just be amazed at all the things, all the wonderful things that women have done. If you just ask to learn about their experiences, there's just a plethora of information there. So, thank you for being open and for allowing me to share just a few of our stories today.
Oh my God, thank you. I mean, again, this is you know like again, I live in a I say like an Amazonian existence where it's female led, female dominated. Um, and this when we met, I was like, we have to talk about this because this was so illuminating. I did not know about this world unto itself. So like, thank you, and like thanks to all the women that are serving and fighting the good fight and have gone unnoticed. So like, thank you for bringing this to light.
All right, and thank
Yeah.
you.